A stranger left a letter on my mother's grave. He wrote, "We've been silent too long." I found the letter on a cold October afternoon when the rain came down in fine needles and the yellow leaves clung to the headstone like wet paper. The envelope was soaked through, tucked beneath the white daisies I'd left the week before, the ink already bleeding but still legible. "We'd been silent too long." I stood there until my coat was heavy with water and something inside my chest finally admitted it had been waiting 17 years for this exact moment. My name is Ethan, 34, living alone in an old cedar-shingled house my mother left me on the wooded edge of a small town in the Pacific Northwest. She died when I was 17, taking with her every explanation, every goodbye, and leaving only the echo of her voice in rooms I refused to enter. People say I have her silence. Every Sunday I drive to the cemetery, lay flowers, wipe the moss from her name, and leave before the questions can catch me. Until the letter. Until the handwriting I almost recognized cracked the lid I'd nailed shut on the past. The rain wasn't falling. It was just there. A cold breath on my face, on the back of my neck, on the stone that carried her name. October had turned the leaves the color of old bruises, and they lay thick over her grave like someone had tried to cover her too soon. I knelt anyway. My knees found the mud without asking permission. And that was when I saw it. A white envelope, half buried under the daisies I'd left last Sunday. Already soft with water. Already bleeding ink. My fingers were too cold to feel much, but I knew the slant of that handwriting before my eyes did. A small, private hurt moved through me, like a hand reaching inside my coat and closing around something I'd kept warm for 17 years. I didn't open it there. Not yet. I just picked it up, mud and all, and held it against my chest as if it might fly away. The groundskeeper was watching from the tool shed, leaning on his rake, pretending he wasn't. I didn't wave. He didn't wave back. We both understood some things are better left unobserved. I walked back to the car slowly. The envelope stayed in my pocket the whole way, pressed flat against my ribs. It burned colder than the rain. The house was quiet when I came in. It always is. The kind of quiet that has weight, like dust that has learned how to settle on your lungs. I took off my wet coat and hung it on the hook she used to use. It still smells faintly of lavender and the hospital soap if I stand close enough. I don't stand close enough anymore. I went straight to the altar. The small one in the corner of the living room that no one but me ever sees. Her photograph sits there, the one from 1998, the year before everything tilted. She is smiling the way people smile when they think there will be time later to be sad. Her eyes soft, mouth softer. I placed the envelope beside the frame. It leaned a little, drunk with rainwater, the ink running just enough to blur the edges of the words. I made tea. The kettle clicked, water sighed, cup warmed my palms. But I didn't drink. I just stood in the kitchen and listened to the house breathe around me. The refrigerator hummed its old tired song. The floorboards in the hallway creaked once, as if someone shifted weight upstairs. No one is upstairs. No one has been upstairs in years. I came back to the altar. Sat on the floor the way I used to when I was small and waiting for her to come out of the bathroom with that tired, loving smile. I opened the envelope. One sheet. Thin. Almost weightless. The words were simple. Child simple. We've been silent too long. That was all. No name. No date. Just that sentence, written by a hand that shook just enough to make the letters lean into each other for comfort. I read it again. And again. Until the letters stopped swimming and settled into my memory like stones dropped into still water. The rain kept not falling outside the window. Streetlights came on early, orange and sick-looking through the wet glass. I stayed on the floor a long time. Long enough for my legs to go numb. Long enough for the tea to go cold on the table beside me. I thought about the way she used to write grocery lists in that same slanted hand. How she would leave them on the fridge with a little magnet shaped like a sunflower. Milk. Bread. Eggs. And sometimes, underneath, in smaller letters, "Don't forget you are loved." I never forgot. I just didn't know what to do with it after she left. The envelope was still wet. I touched it again. The paper had gone soft, almost flesh-like. I folded it once, carefully, and slipped it inside the frame, right against the glass, over her smiling mouth. As if she could read it too. As if she already had. I whispered to the empty room, so quietly the walls almost missed it. "Who is we, Mom?" The photograph didn't answer. Of course it didn't. But the house creaked again, a little louder this time, like it was clearing its throat after 17 years of holding something back. I left the light on in the living room when I went to bed. I don't usually. Tonight the dark felt impolite. The envelope stayed where I put it. Leaning against her smile. Waiting. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't lock my bedroom door. The clock on my nightstand said 2:17 a.m., but time had stopped mattering hours ago. I lay very still under the blanket that still carried the faint scent of her detergent, the one with the blue cap she bought in bulk. The house was doing its usual breathing. Creak in the hallway. Pause. Another creak, closer. Soft. Like someone trying not to wake me. But no one else lives here. No one has lived here with me for 17 years. I closed my eyes and counted the steps anyway. 1, 2, 3. Then nothing. Just the low hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the rain that had finally decided to fall properly, tapping on the roof like impatient fingers. I told myself it was the wind. Old houses talk. They always have. She used to say that when I was small and scared of the dark. "They're just remembering," she'd whisper, pulling the blanket up to my chin. "They remember when feet walked these floors that aren't walking anymore." Tonight the house wasn't remembering. It was listening. I sat up slowly. The sheet slid off my shoulders and the cold found me immediately. My bare feet touched the floorboards and they were colder than usual, as if they'd been waiting for my weight. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't need to. I know every shadow in this hallway by heart. Her door was at the very end. The one I painted white the year after the funeral because the original color hurt too much to look at. I had locked it the day we came home without her. Turned the key twice, pocketed the key, and somewhere between the cemetery and here, the key disappeared. I never looked for it. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Tonight the door stood open. Not wide. Just enough for the darkness inside to breathe out. I stood in front of it for a long time. Long enough for my heartbeat to slow down and match the rain. The air coming from her room carried cedar and lavender, the exact combination of her wardrobe sachets and the wooden trunk she kept at the foot of her bed. The smell moved over my face like a hand I used to know. I lifted my phone. The flashlight cut a thin white line into the black. Dust floated inside the beam like slow snow. I stepped over the threshold. The room hadn't changed its mind about anything. The single bed still made with the pale blue quilt she bought on our last trip together. The pillows still plump, waiting. The wardrobe doors closed, but not latched. One side had slipped open over the years, showing the sleeve of her gray cardigan hanging out like it was trying to leave. Her small writing desk by the window. The leather diary exactly where it had always been. Closed. Patient. I moved the light across the walls. The same faint wallpaper roses, faded to the color of weak tea. The same crack in the ceiling that looked like a lightning bolt frozen mid-flash. The same silence, but tonight it had weight. It pressed against my ears the way deep water does. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough for the phone light to make my hand shake a little. Long enough for the letter in my coat pocket, still downstairs on the chair where I'd left it, to start burning again through the whole house and into this room. I walked to the desk. My fingers left prints in the dust on the chair before I sat. The leather diary was cool and slightly damp from years of no one breathing near it. I didn't open it. Not yet. I just rested my hand on top, the way you rest your hand on a dog that might bite but you hope won't. The scent of her was stronger here. Not perfume. Her. The warmth behind her ears when she hugged me after a nightmare. The skin on the inside of her wrist where she let me press my cheek when I was sick. It was all here, held perfectly still by the locked door that somehow wasn't locked anymore. I looked at the bed. The quilt had one small dent in the middle, as if someone had sat on the edge recently. Not deep. Just enough to notice if you were looking for it. I was looking for it. I turned the phone light toward the floor. There were no footprints in the dust. Only mine, fresh and dark, leading straight from the door to this chair. But the air felt walked through. Like someone had passed through it very carefully, trying not to disturb anything. Someone who knew exactly how the boards creaked and which ones to avoid. I opened the diary. The first page was blank now. It hadn't always been. I remembered her writing in it at this same desk, pen scratching softly while I pretended to sleep in the next room. She would pause sometimes, look toward my door, smile a small private smile, then keep writing. I never asked what she wrote. Children know some questions break things. I turned another page. Blank. Another. Blank. Then suddenly words, her handwriting, slanted and careful. A sentence only. If you're reading this, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. The phone light trembled. The shadows on the wall moved like they were leaning in to see. I closed the diary. Not because I was afraid of what came next. Because I was afraid of how much I wanted to read it. How much I wanted to punish myself with whatever she'd left behind. I stood up. The chair scraped softly. The sound felt too loud, like an apology spoken in a library. I walked to the wardrobe. Reached in and touched the gray cardigan sleeve. Still soft. Still carrying her shape in the shoulders. I pulled it out a little further. Underneath, folded exactly the way she used to fold my school shirts, was a small white envelope. New. No address. My name written on the front in handwriting that was not hers. My throat closed. I didn't open it here. I couldn't. I pressed it against my chest the same way I'd pressed the first letter, and walked backwards out of the room, keeping the light on her bed until the very last second. Then I pulled the door until it almost closed. Not all the way. Just enough to keep the scent inside. I stood in the hallway again. The rain had stopped. Everything was listening. I whispered into the dark, so quietly only the walls and whatever else was here could hear. I'm here now, Mom. You can stop waiting. The house didn't answer. But the floorboard under my left foot creaked once. Soft. Like a sigh of relief. The phone light was beginning to dim, the battery warning a thin red line at the top of the screen. I didn't care. I lowered myself to the floor anyway, right there in front of her desk, knees pressing into dust that had waited 17 years for someone to disturb it again. The wood was so cold it felt wet. Like it had been crying in secret and never bothered to dry its face. I set the phone down beside me, light pointed up toward the ceiling so the room floated in a pale, underwater glow. Everything looked softer that way. Less abandoned. More like it was only sleeping. The diary rested in my lap now, heavier than it should be for something so small. The leather had gone dark with age, almost black, the gold lettering of her initials long since worn away. I ran my thumb along the spine. It felt like touching the inside of her wrist, warm once, now cool, but still hers. I opened it slowly. The spine cracked, just once, like an old bone finally giving in to being moved. Dust rose in a small cloud and settled on my sleeves. First page. Blank. Second page. Blank. Third. Fourth. I kept turning, careful, as if the paper might crumble if I went too fast. Then the tearing started. Not neat. Not careful. Ragged, angry edges, some pages ripped so violently that little triangles of paper still clung to the binding like teeth that didn't want to let go. Whoever did this had been in a hurry. Or in pain. Or both. I tilted the diary toward the light. Fragments remained. Half sentences. Single words. Met him again by the river. Swore we would. If they ever found out. Silence is the only way. Silence. 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 The word appeared again and again, sometimes underlined so hard the pen had gone through the paper. Like bruises that refused to heal. My thumb stopped on one page that had only one line left intact. The rest of the page was gone, torn clean away, but this sentence sat alone in the middle, small and careful and trembling. If you ever read this, forgive me. The air in the room changed. It got thicker. Harder to pull into my lungs. I read it again. Again. Until the words stopped being words and became a sound inside my chest. I didn't feel the tears at first. They were just warmth sliding down the sides of my nose, dripping off my jaw onto the open diary. One landed on the word forgive and spread the ink a little, making it bleed the way the letter had bled under the rain. I didn't make a sound. I never do. But something inside me broke open quietly, the way ice breaks on a lake in early spring, slow, inevitable, no drama, just surrender. It wasn't that I missed her. I have missed her every day for 17 years. This was different. This was realizing she had never really left. She had stayed here, in this room, in these torn pages, in the spaces where words used to be. She had stayed and waited for me to be brave enough to come find her. I closed the diary. Pressed it against my chest the way I used to press my face into her shoulder when the world was too loud. The leather was cold now, but I could almost feel it warm under my cheek, almost feel her hand on the other end. I looked around the room again. The dent in the quilt seemed deeper now. As if someone had sat there very recently, reading these same ruined pages, crying the same silent tears. Maybe she had come back, just once, to tear out what she couldn't bear for me to see. Or maybe someone else had come for her. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my shirt. It came away wet and dusty. I didn't care. I stood up slowly. My knees cracked. The phone light flickered, then steadied. I placed the diary back on the desk exactly where it had been. Not closed all the way. Left open at the page with her apology, so the words could keep breathing. I walked to the bed. Touched the dent in the quilt with 2 fingers. It was still cool. But not as cool as it should have been. I whispered into the quiet, the way you whisper into an empty church even when you don't believe anyone is listening. I already do, Mom. I already do. The room didn't answer. But the dust stopped floating. It settled. Like it had finally been given permission to rest. I left the door open when I walked out. Wide open this time. Let the lavender and cedar drift down the hallway and find the rest of the house. Let them find me. I didn't go back to my bedroom. I went downstairs and sat on the bottom stair in the dark, diary in my lap again, the torn edges cutting softly into my palms. Outside, the first bird tried a note, then thought better of it. The night was still holding its breath. I sat there until the sky turned the color of weak coffee through the window. Until the letter on the altar stopped burning and started glowing instead. And I understood something I hadn't before. She didn't tear those pages to hide from me. She tore them to protect someone else. Whoever he is. He's running out of silence to hide behind. 3 days had passed, but the rain had not. It had only grown quieter. A thin, polite drizzle that apologized for existing while still soaking everything through. I stood under the old cedar at the edge of the cemetery, coat collar turned up, hands deep in pockets, watching the same patch of earth I had visited every Sunday. Only today someone else had arrived first. He was already there. Tall. So tall the gray coat seemed to borrow length from the sky itself. The felt hat was pulled low, brim dripping like a broken gutter. He did not move. Not even when the wind pushed at him. He simply stood in front of her stone as though he had grown there years ago and no one had noticed until now. In his gloved hands he held carnations. Deep red. Almost black in this light. The exact shade my mother once called the color of apologies that come too late. I stayed back. 10 feet. Maybe 12. Close enough to see the flowers tremble, far enough that my breath would not reach him. The air between us felt thick, like wet wool. I did not speak. He did not turn. He bent slowly, knees cracking the way old gates do, and laid the bouquet at the base of the stone. The cellophane crackled once, then surrendered to the rain. Red petals opened wider, drinking. He stayed bowed for a long time. Long enough for me to count the raindrops sliding off the brim of his hat. 1. 2. 17. 43. His shoulders moved. Not a sob. Just a small rise and fall, the way a man breathes when he is trying not to disturb the dead. When he straightened, the light caught the back of his left hand as he adjusted the flowers. A scar. Long, pale, slightly raised. Running from the edge of the glove to the cuff of the coat sleeve. I knew that scar. I had known it before I had language for knowing. My lungs forgot their job for a few seconds. He turned then, not toward me, just away, and began to walk the narrow path between the graves. Slow steps. Deliberate. Like every footfall cost him something he could not afford to lose. His right hand held the hat now, pressed against his chest. The left hand swung loose at his side. The scar flashed again as he passed beneath the weak lamplight near the gate, white against skin that had forgotten sun. He never looked back. Not once. He simply disappeared into the mist the way people do in dreams you don't want to wake from. I waited until the sound itself gave up, until even the drizzle seemed embarrassed to keep falling. Then I walked forward. The carnations looked obscene against her stone. Too bright. Too alive. Water beaded on the petals like tiny accusations. I did not touch them. I only crouched, elbows on knees, and stared at the place where his shoes had pressed faint prints into the mud. The left print was deeper. He favored the right leg. I filed that away without meaning to. I reached out and brushed one petal with the back of my finger. Cold. Slick. It left a faint red stain on my skin, as if the flower had bled on me. I stayed there until my coat was heavy and my fingers had lost feeling. Until the groundskeeper started his truck in the distance and pretended not to see me again. When I finally stood, the scar was all I could see behind my eyes. A pale lightning bolt on the back of a hand that once, somewhere, had touched my mother gently enough to leave a mark that never healed. I whispered to the rain and to her and to the space he had left empty. I remember you now. The carnations did not answer. One petal loosened and fell, landing face down in the mud like a mouth that had finally decided to stay closed. I left them there. Red on gray. Apology on stone. And I walked home slower than I have ever walked, carrying the weight of a scar I wasn't supposed to recognize. Dusk came early, the way it does when the sky is too tired to stay light. I sat on the floor of her room again, back against the bed, the torn diary closed beside me like a sleeping animal. The house had gone completely quiet, as if it, too, was holding its breath for what came next. I had not turned on the overhead light. Only the small lamp on her desk, the one with the cracked green shade that throws a bruised glow across everything. It made the dust look like ash falling in slow motion. My hands knew where to go before my mind did. Bottom drawer, left side, under the stack of folded scarves she never wore after I was born. The drawer stuck, the way it always had. I pulled harder. Wood side against wood. Inside, among the lavender sachets now thin as paper, was a photograph folded in four, edges soft from being touched too many times in secret. I unfolded it carefully, as if it might tear along the creases of someone else's regret. She was 25, maybe 26. Hair longer than I ever saw it, loose over one shoulder, eyes bright with a kind of happiness that embarrassed me to witness. She stood close, very close, to a man whose face had been scratched out with something sharp. Not torn. Scratched. Again and again, until only silver scars remained where his features used to be. But his body, arm, hand, those were untouched. And from his waistcoat hung the silver pocket watch on its chain, catching the sun like a small private moon. I knew that watch. I had dusted around it every week for 17 years. It sat on her altar downstairs, lid closed, hands never wound, never opened. She had said once, only once, voice soft as cloth. "Don't ever open that, Ethan. Some things are meant to stay stopped." I went downstairs slowly. Each stair creaked the exact note it had creaked since I was 7. The watch waited where it always waited, beside her photograph, catching the last of the lamplight on its curved back. My fingers closed around it. It was warmer than the room. As if it had been holding sunlight all these years. I carried it back upstairs. Sat again on her floor. Held the photograph in one hand, the watch in the other. They belonged together. They had been waiting for me to notice. I turned the watch over. The metal was smooth, worn soft at the edges from years in a pocket close to a heart. There, almost too small to read in the green light, the engraving. To Evelyn. Forever is not long enough. 1987. My throat made a sound I didn't recognize. I pressed the crown. The lid opened with a tiny reluctant click, like a mouth that had forgotten how to speak. Inside, the face was cream-colored, Roman numerals, delicate black hands stopped at 317. I did not know if that was the time she died, or the time he left, or the time they last kissed. Maybe all three. There was a second lid, an inner dust cover. I opened that too. On the inside, in handwriting I now knew by heart, the same slant, the same tremble. If you are reading this, I was not brave enough. Forgive me for both of us. V. The room tilted very gently. Not the house. Me. I closed the watch. Held it against my lips for a long time. It tasted of metal and old tears. I looked again at the ruined photograph. At the place where his face should have been. The scratches were not angry. They were careful. Loving, almost. As if she had wanted to erase him so completely that even memory would lose its grip, yet could not bear to throw the picture away. I understood then. The carnations. The scar. The silence that had lasted nearly 40 years. He had not come back after all this time. He had never left. I placed the watch on the floor between my knees. Put the photograph on top of it, face down, so the engraving and the scratched-out lover could finally touch again. And I sat there in the green light until the lamp flickered once, twice, then settled. Outside, the rain returned. Soft. Almost tender. I whispered to the watch, to the photograph, to the mother who was suddenly 25 again in my hands. I see you now. Both of you. The watch did not tick. But something in the room shifted. Like a breath finally let go after decades of holding. I left them there together on the floor. Did not pick them up again that night. Some doors, once opened, are meant to stay open. The clock in the hallway had stopped at 11:47 the night she died, and no one ever fixed it. I still glanced at it out of habit, as though time might have changed its mind. It hadn't. So when the landline rang at what felt like the deepest part of the night, the sound was wrong in every way. A shrill, old-fashioned bell that belonged to another life. I was already awake. I had been awake for hours, lying very still, listening to the house rehearse its creaks. The phone rang again. Once. Twice. A third time, insistent, like someone who knew I would answer. I walked barefoot down the stairs. The wood was so cold it burned. The phone hung on the wall where it had always hung, cream-colored plastic gone yellow with age, cord coiled like a sleeping snake. No one had this number anymore. The company disconnected it the month after the funeral. I kept the phone because throwing it away felt like hanging up on her forever. It rang a fourth time. I lifted the receiver. Silence first. Then breathing. Heavy. Wet. The kind of breathing you hear from someone who has been crying too long or running too far. I did not speak. I only listened, hand pressed so hard against the wall the wallpaper pattern printed itself into my palm. Inhale. Long, shaking. Exhale. Like air pushed through a cracked reed. I counted the breaths. 7. 11. 17. The hallway was completely dark except for the faint green glow of the smoke detector blinking its tiny heartbeat above me. I whispered, finally. Hello? The breathing caught. Hitched. Then continued, slower, as though the person on the other end was trying to match my rhythm. I closed my eyes. The darkness behind my lids was warmer than the hallway. Who is this? Nothing. Only that ragged tide, in and out, in and out. Almost a minute passed. Maybe more. Time had left the house again. Then, so faint I felt it more than heard it, a voice like paper tearing. I'm sorry. The line went dead. Not hung up. Died. A small click, then the hollow hum of nothing. I stood there a long time. Receiver still at my ear. Cold plastic against my cheek. Listening to the silence that came after the apology. My hand would not let go. It stayed pressed to my ear as if the voice might change its mind and come back. The cord swayed gently, brushing my leg like a cat that wanted attention. I finally hung up. The click echoed down the hallway and up the stairs. The house seemed to sigh with me. I did not turn on the light. I walked to the bottom stair and sat. Elbows on knees. Head in hands. The cold from the floor climbed my spine slowly, patiently. I knew that breathing. I had heard it once before, 17 years ago, through a hospital door I was not allowed to open. The night she waited for someone who never came. I looked at the phone again. It looked innocent now. Just an old thing on the wall. But it had remembered the number. Someone had remembered. I spoke to the empty hallway, voice small, cracked in the middle. You're too late. The smoke detector blinked its green eye. Once. Twice. As if agreeing. I stayed on the stair until the first gray thread of morning found the window. The phone did not ring again. But I left it off the hook anyway. Just in case the line stayed open. Just in case he found the courage to finish the sentence. The sky that Sunday was the color of old porcelain, thin and ready to crack. I walked the same path I had walked for years, boots knowing every root, every dip in the gravel. The cemetery was empty except for the crows that always waited for me on the iron fence. They didn't fly away this time. They only turned their heads, black eyes watching as I came closer to her stone. The envelope was there before I was. Clean. Dry. Placed exactly where the first one had been, but this time the daisies I brought last week were pushed gently aside, like someone had made room. I stopped 3 steps away. The air felt different. Thicker. As if the morning itself had been holding its breath since the phone call. I knelt slowly. The grass was wet, cold through my jeans, but I didn't feel it yet. My fingers touched the envelope first, just the corner, testing if it was real. It was. Thicker than the first. Something inside had weight. I opened it there, under the wide gray sky. The photograph slid out into my palm like it had been waiting for my skin. She was standing in sunlight. Golden, late summer light that made her hair glow like it was on fire. Her hand rested on the curve of her belly, protective, proud, gentle. She was looking straight into the lens, eyes shining with something so bright it hurt to see. A smile small and secret, the kind you give only to someone who already knows everything about you. Someone who loves you anyway. I turned the photograph over. The handwriting I now knew by heart, trembling, older now, but still his. She looks more like you than I ever imagined. The world went quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when a glass drops but hasn't hit the floor yet. I sank. Slowly. Until my knees were in the grass and the grass was in my hands and the hands were shaking. The crows didn't make a sound. Even the wind held still. I stared at her belly. At the place where I had been. At the hand that had held me before I had a name. She was looking at him. The man holding the camera. The man my mother married 2 years later. The man I grew up calling father, who taught me to ride a bike and never once looked at me the way she is looking at the person behind the lens. My chest made a small sound. Not a sob. Just a small, wounded animal noise that came from somewhere very old. Tears came without permission. Hot. Silent. They fell onto the photograph, onto her smile, onto the belly that held me. I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. Let them blur the ink just a little. Let them mix with the grass and earth and whatever was left of me. He had seen this moment. He had held the camera. He had watched her glow with me inside her. And then he had left. Or been made to leave. Or chosen silence. I didn't know yet. But I knew now why she never spoke his name. Why some nights she would touch her belly in her sleep and whisper sorry into the dark. I pressed the photograph to my chest. Felt it stick slightly to my shirt where the tears had soaked through. The envelope lay empty in the grass, white as bone. I looked at her stone. At the name carved there. Evelyn. Beloved mother. No mention of wife. No mention of anything before. I spoke to the ground. Voice cracked, barely above the grass. You should have told me. The crows shifted on the fence. One feather fell. Black. It landed beside the envelope like a period at the end of a sentence no one wanted to finish. I stayed there until my legs went numb. Until the light changed and the crows finally flew away. Until I understood that the silence hadn't been hers alone. It had been his too. And now he was ending it. One photograph at a time. I stood up slowly. The photograph stayed against my heart, inside my coat now. Warm from my skin. wet from my tears. I didn't leave flowers this time. I left the empty envelope instead. Let it lie there like a mouth that had finally said enough. Walking home, I felt the weight of her belly against my ribs. The weight of his eyes behind the camera. The weight of a love that had waited almost 40 years to speak. And I knew. Without anger. Without drama. Just a quiet, breaking open. That the next time he came, I would be waiting. 3 nights after the silent phone call, the rain stopped as if someone had simply turned off a tap. The silence that followed was louder than any storm. I sat in the living room with only the small lamp on the altar glowing, its weak gold pooling around her photograph like old honey. The pregnant photograph lay face up on the coffee table. I had not moved it since I came home. I had not stopped looking at it either. The clock ticked, but slower than my heart. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps. Pause. 3 more. The sound was so deliberate it felt rehearsed for decades. It did not hurry. It did not plead. It only asked to be heard. I did not stand at once. I let the knock settle into the walls, into the floorboards, into the marrow of the house. My pulse answered with a single, slow beat, as though it had been waiting too. I walked barefoot. Cold wood. No lights. I knew which boards forgave my weight and which ones would betray me. I chose the forgiving ones. I opened the door. He was there. Coat dark with old rain, hat held against his chest like a shield, hair white as the moon that wasn't out tonight. His eyes were red, not from drink, but from crying, or not sleeping, or both. He looked smaller than he had at the grave, as if the years had folded him inward. He did not speak. He only lifted his hand. A thick envelope, edges curled from being carried too close to a heart for too long. I took it. Our fingers brushed. His were ice. The scar on the back of his hand looked freshly opened under the porch light. I did not ask him in. Not yet. I was not ready to let the night inside the house that had only ever known one kind of silence. I began to close the door. Slowly. When the gap was no wider than a breath, I heard him whisper against the wood, voice cracked open like old paint. I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know the truth. The door shut. The lock clicked, soft as a secret finally told. I leaned my back against it. The envelope pressed to my chest. Heavy. Heavier than paper should be. I slid down the door until I sat on the floor, knees up, the same spot where my mother used to sit mending my school uniforms while I did homework at the little table. I opened the envelope under the thin gold light from the altar. Inside was her handwriting first, her last will, written when I was 16, the year her illness began, whispering. Simple words. If a man named Victor Kane ever comes, give him the cassette in the music box. Let him hear me one last time. Below it, his pages. Many pages. Shaky, careful letters. And the cassette, black, scratched, waiting. I did not read his words yet. I only held the tape. Small. Light. But it carried her voice, and that made it the heaviest thing in the room. I stood. Walked to her bedroom, door still open since the night the lock forgot its purpose. Opened the wardrobe. Pushed aside the sweaters that still smelled faintly of her. The music box was there, wood dark with age, ballerina missing one leg. I opened it. The cassette waited inside, identical to the one he had just given me. She had kept one. He had kept the other. They had both been waiting for me to be old enough, or brave enough, or broken enough. I carried everything downstairs. Sat on the rug in front of the altar. The old cassette player was still plugged in. She used to play lullabies on it long after I stopped needing them. I pushed the tape in. Pressed play. Her voice filled the room after 17 silent years. Soft. Trembling. Alive. If you're listening to this, I'm sorry. I wasn't brave. Victor. Victor Kane is your father. Not the man you call Dad. Victor was the one I loved before I knew what love costs. My family took that love and broke it in their hands. Threatened him. Threatened me. Threatened you, before you were even born. I chose silence to keep you safe. I chose wrong. But I don't regret you. I only regret the years he lost of you. If he comes, let him say sorry. I never got to hear it. Let him say it for both of us. The tape clicked off. The room held its breath with me. I looked at the closed door. At the shadow of his shoes still visible through the frosted glass panel. I stood. Walked to the door. Opened it again. He was still there. Standing exactly where I left him. Hat crushed in his hands. Rain starting again, soft as forgiveness. I said nothing. I only stepped aside. He looked up. Eyes wet. Searching my face for something he was terrified to find. I moved back. He stepped in. We stood in the small hallway, two strangers sharing the same ghost. I closed the door behind him. The house did not creak. It sighed. And for the first time in 17 years, the silence changed its mind. It became listening. The envelope lay open on my lap like a wound that had finally agreed to bleed. I had carried it upstairs without turning on any lights, letting the moon do the work through the half-closed blinds. Silver bars across the bedspread, across my hands, across the thick pages that trembled even when I was perfectly still. I did not read his letter first. Something told me to start with hers. The top sheet was her handwriting. The same slant I had found bleeding in the rain. Dated the week of my 16th birthday, when she was already thin and pretending she wasn't. To my son, Ethan. If you are reading this, I am gone and Victor Kane has come. Give him the cassette in the music box. Do not hate him. Do not hate me. Just let him hear me one last time. I love you more than the silence I chose. Mom. The paper shook because my hand shook. Not from cold. From the sudden weight of knowing she had planned for this night long before I was ready. I stood. Walked to her wardrobe on legs that felt borrowed. The door creaked the same small creak it had creaked since I was small enough to hide inside among her dresses. I pushed the hanging clothes aside. Wool and cotton and lavender sachets now thin as dead leaves. My fingers found the shape at the very back. The music box. Dark wood. Ballerina on top missing one porcelain arm, snapped off the year I tried to make her dance too hard. Mother never fixed it. She said some things are more honest broken. I carried it to the bed like it was made of glass. Sat cross-legged in the way I used to when she read to me. The lid opened with a sigh that sounded exactly like hers. Inside, on faded pink velvet, lay the cassette. Black. Labeled in her careful handwriting, for V, if he ever dares. My throat closed. I reached for the old Walkman on her nightstand, the one with the cracked leather strap she used to wear around her neck when she gardened. Headphones still there, foam worn to nothing. I plugged them in. Put them on. Pressed play with a thumb that did not feel like mine. Click. Then her voice. Younger than I remembered. Shaky, as if the tape itself was afraid. Victor, if you're listening. Ethan found you. That means I didn't make it. I knew I wouldn't. A pause filled with the soft hush of her breathing, exactly the same breathing I had heard on the phone 3 nights earlier. We were 25. You remember the river. You remember the watch. You remember the night they came to your apartment and told you if you ever came near me again they would make sure I lost everything, including the child I was carrying. You left to save us. I let you. I married the man they chose. I smiled in photographs. I never smiled with my whole face again. Another pause. Longer. I heard her swallow. I told Ethan his father died in a car accident. I let him grow up believing a lie because the truth felt crueler. I was wrong. Silence is crueler. It eats you from the inside, slow, polite bites every day. Her voice cracked, but only once. If he hates me, tell him I understand. Tell him I loved him enough to ruin myself. Tell him I loved you enough to ruin us both. And tell him his mother was a coward who learned too late that love is louder than fear. The tape kept turning. I heard her crying now, small, trying not to be heard. One more thing. Let him say sorry just once. I never got to hear it. I want to believe it would have been enough. Click. Silence. The headphones felt suddenly heavy, like they were filled with water. I took them off slowly. The room was exactly the same, but everything had moved. I looked at the music box still open on the bed. The little ballerina stared at me with one painted eye, the broken arm raised forever in a dance that would never finish. I closed the lid. Soft click. Then I picked up his pages. Turned to the last one. He had written only one line at the very bottom, in handwriting now so familiar it hurt. I am outside. If you open the door, I will say it. If you don't, I will understand. Either way, she finally spoke. Thank you for letting her. I stood up. Walked to the window. Pulled the curtain aside just enough. He was there. Standing under the porch light, snow-white hair catching the glow like frost. Hat in his hands. Shoulders curved forward, waiting for a verdict he already believed he deserved. I let the curtain fall back. Walked downstairs. Each step deliberate. No hurry. No anger. Only the sound of 17 years folding themselves into this single moment. I opened the door. He looked up. Eyes red. Scar pale in the cold light. I stepped aside. He understood. He crossed the threshold. I closed the door behind him. The house did not creak in protest. It exhaled. And somewhere upstairs, the broken ballerina kept dancing in the dark. Finally. With both arms. I sent him a message the night after he left the envelope. One line only. No greeting. No signature. Thursday. 3 p.m. Her stone. Come alone. He answered with a single word. Okay. Thursday arrived without rain. The sky was the color of a washed-out sheet, thin and tired, but dry. I walked the path slowly, boots crunching on gravel still damp from all the days before. The air smelled of wet pine and turned earth. I carried nothing. Not flowers. Not anger. Only the pocket watch in my coat, ticking for the first time in decades because I had wound it that morning. He was already there. Standing exactly 1 meter from her name, as if he had measured the distance with his own guilt. Gray coat unbuttoned, hat in his hands again, hair moving slightly in the breeze like white smoke. He did not turn when my steps announced me. He only waited. I stopped beside him. Not closer. Not yet. We stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes on her stone, the space between us filled with everything unsaid. Minutes passed. Maybe 5. Maybe 20. The wind lifted a few yellow leaves and laid them gently at the base of the grave like small apologies. He spoke first. Voice low, cracked, The way old steps creak when you try not to wake the house. I loved her before I had a name for it. We were 25. She laughed like sunlight on river water. I kept every laugh in a jar inside my chest. Then her father came. With money. With threats. With the kind of power that doesn't shout, it only smiles while it breaks you. They told me if I stayed, they would take the child. They would make sure she lost everything. So I disappeared. I thought I was saving her. I thought I was saving you. He stopped. Swallowed. The scar on his hand caught the pale light when he tightened his grip on the hat. I married the man they chose. He was kind enough. He never hit her. He provided. But he never looked at her the way you look at the only person who makes the world make sense. She smiled in photographs. Only I knew the smile never reached her eyes after 1987. Another silence. Longer. A crow landed on a nearby stone, looked at us, flew away again. I watched you grow. From a distance. School plays. Graduation. The day you bought this house from her estate. I stood across the street and cried like a fool. I never came closer. I didn't have the right. His voice broke on the last word. Not loud. Just a small fracture. She got sick. I heard. I drove through the night. Got here one day too late. She was already gone. I stood outside the hospital window and said sorry to the glass. She couldn't hear me. I've been saying it ever since. He turned to me then. Slowly. Eyes the same gray as the sky, red at the rims, full of everything he had carried alone. He asked the question so quietly I felt it more than heard it. Do you hate her for it? I looked at the stone. At the name carved deep. At the dates that held my whole childhood in a dash. I thought of the torn pages. The pocket watch stopped at 3:17. The cassette that still smelled like her wardrobe. The pregnant photograph where she glowed for him. I reached into my coat. Took out the watch. Held it out, face up, hands still at 3:17. I started it this morning. He stared at it. Then at me. His mouth moved, but no sound came. I stepped forward. Closed the meter. Took his scarred hand. Opened it. Placed the watch in his palm. Closed his fingers over it. The metal was warm from my body. I spoke, voice soft, almost gone. She waited for you every day. She just didn't know how to say it out loud. He made a sound. Not a sob. Something smaller. Something that had been trapped for 38 years. He sank to his knees. Slowly. Hat fell into the grass. He pressed the watch to his forehead like it burned and healed at the same time. I knelt beside him. Not touching. Just there. We stayed like that until the light began to thin. Until the wind turned cold and honest. He whispered against the watch. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I'm here now. The watch ticked between us. Steady. Alive. I placed my hand over his. Over the scar. Over the years. I don't hate her. I don't hate you. He looked at me then. Really looked. Like he was seeing her in my face and forgiving himself for the first time. We rose together. Slowly. Two men held up by the same quiet love. I picked up his hat. Dusted it. Handed it to him. He put it on. Pulled it low. The way he had the day he left the carnations. We stood a moment longer. Then I spoke the word I had never planned to say. Walk me home? He nodded. Once. We left the cemetery side by side. 1 meter became half. Half became nothing. Behind us, the stone stood in the fading light. Quiet. Finally at peace. And for the first time in my life, the gravel didn't sound lonely under my feet. It sounded like coming home. The afternoon had no intention of being kind. It simply arrived, pale and thin, the kind of light that makes everything look like it's already a memory. I stood at the fridge door longer than I needed to, letting the cold spill over my bare feet, staring at the carnations he had left weeks ago. They were still there, wrapped in damp paper towel, stems in a jar of water I changed every few days without thinking. The red had deepened, almost bruised, but they had not wilted. They had waited, the way he had waited. The way she had waited. I took them out. The paper crackled softly, like an old letter being opened for the first time. The flowers were cold against my chest as I carried them to the car. My white daisies lay on the passenger seat, innocent, ordinary. The carnations rode in the back, quiet, heavy with color. The cemetery was almost empty. Only an old woman far away, placing plastic roses that would never die. I walked the path slowly. Gravel shifted under my shoes like it was trying to speak, then thought better of it. He was already there. Standing a little to the side of her stone, hands in his coat pockets, hat pulled low. He didn't move when he saw me. He only watched, eyes red even in the cold light, as if he had been crying since the day he was born. I stopped in front of the grave. Knelt without hurry. The grass was damp, soaking through my jeans at the knees, but I welcomed the chill. I laid my daisies first. White on gray stone. Clean. Familiar. Then I reached for the carnations. The stems were ice in my fingers. I unwrapped them carefully, slowly, like undressing a wound. The red was shocking against the green grass, against her name, against everything soft and forgiven. She had hated this color. She had hated what it meant. Too loud. Too late. Too much blood in it. I placed them anyway. Right beside my white. Side by side. No space between. 2 bouquets. 2 men. 1 woman who carried both of us in her body and then in her silence. I stayed kneeling. The ground pressed cold into my bones. I felt him move closer. Not touching. Just closer. Until his shadow fell across the flowers and covered them both. I looked up. He was staring at the carnations like they might speak. His mouth opened, closed. Opened again. Nothing came. I reached out. Slow. Deliberate. My hand found his. The scarred one. The one that had trembled when he laid the first bouquet. The one that had held the camera when she was round with me. The one that had disappeared so I could be born safe. His fingers were freezing. Shaking. But they did not pull away. I closed my hand around his. Tight. Not gentle. Not yet. He made a sound. Small. Broken. Like a breath that had been held since 1987. We stayed like that. Kneeling. Hand in hand. Over the flowers. Over her name. Over the years. The wind came then. Cold. Honest. It moved through the carnations and the daisies without choosing sides. Petals touched. Red on white. White on red. Like they had finally agreed to share the same earth. He sank lower. Until his forehead almost touched the stone. I felt his hand tighten in mine. Not letting go. Not asking. Just holding on. I looked at the sky. It was thinning, turning the color of ash. The light was leaving. Taking its time with it. I spoke. Voice so soft the wind almost stole it. But he heard. Dad. The word left my mouth and hung in the air between us. Simple. Plain. 17 years late. And exactly on time. He made the sound again. This time it had shape. A sob, but quiet. Like a door finally allowed to close. He turned his hand in mine. Palm to palm. Scar against skin. Father to son. We did not hug. We did not need to. The wind did it for us. Wrapped around us. Cold, but not cruel anymore. We stood up together. Slowly. Old knees. New hearts. The flowers stayed. Red and white. Bleeding into each other. I did not let go of his hand. We walked out of the cemetery like that. Side by side. No words. Just the gravel speaking softly under two sets of footsteps that finally matched. Behind us, the stone stood quiet. The light faded. The wind kept blowing. And for the first time in 17 years, the silence felt like breathing. Like mercy. Like beginning.